Okay. Yeah, let's see. We can start. Really great, Lukey, to be chatting today. It's like quite amazing. People listening. It really a great whole brain functioning show that we have, which it's great because it causes you to have a great more knowledge about inductive process and things. And everyone has a capacity to be able to have taken aboard instruction. And how is it that you're good where something comes in that it actually is put in so that it does assist you to help create change, and information could become embedded, and it's then more bondedness where things are like, for instance, a good example where a young gosling could have only just seen the first one, Fluffy, was one of us or something, and it bonded to us more or less as a parent sort of thing, because it was really empty, really nice and empty, and so information just really going in really good. And there's a tonal band which all of us have, which when you're using this tonal band, you're sort of more in a reading tone. And that when you're in a reading tone, it really is you more where information is going in and there's not any defense much needing to be, it's just going in. And so whole brain functioning really, like we're going to be talking a bit about it, but it really does apply inductive technique, and it combines more whole body calibration, which in inductive technique is sort of like techniques that could be used, so many, matter of fact, to cause induction, meaning information is going in and it's going in more clean and it has the ability to be able to have its effect, versus sort of information went in and it was sort of really overlaid with those things. And to combine whole body calibration, which whole brain functioning is got within it a capacity to be able to look and see all the movements that go on. And these movements are acting as accessing cues to assist to cause some information or as a memory to be recalled. And wherever anything goes that is beyond your present sensory awareness, because you and I, we only have 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information at any one period of time, and that's in our wakeful state, and everything else is sort of below that, more in our other than conscious self. And whole body calibration is being able to calibrate those movements to internal neurology that's being used. Analog sculpting is another component of whole brain functioning, which is sculpting the analog to be able to automatically create a state of more inductiveness and being able to use analog more to be able to help process things, which is non-lexical. So it really is, all these techniques are used to assist to help you create change and also be able to get a sense of sentiment that someone has, and what's beneficial more where you're able to imprint new information and facilitate positive change where people are. But the key really is technique more, which you're including analog sculpting, and you've got more automatic induction, and you're using more leverage induction, which listeners can learn a little bit more about. So you're languaging your suggestions more with a framework of behavioural change is happening, you see, and you're using things in a manner that's causing anchoring more of various states and material, but then you could use that anchor to draw forth the memory. And so this is really how your brain, my brain, anyone's working. And you're building rapport, you're learning how to do this, and you're really becoming really good at reframing. And so other things, which is like timeline therapeutics, and the use of timeline, which is extraordinary. It's how information is stored and retrieved. And then also you've got other things which is well to do with the perceptual filters that you filter things through, and then more emotional control that you're getting a handle where things are, and you're able to visualize the use of using the vestibular sense, which is the whole body movement component that you're using in languaging, like on, off, up, down, forward, back, and your spatial insight and your locus of control, and to be able to associate and to dissociate and these things. You're learning how to use the vestibular sense, which we might talk a bit about here. And so having perfect detachment really is more where you're seeing, accessing and influencing the other than conscious mind. And all of us really have got a lot more sort of control over emotions, see. So if you have a dial in your navel and you only could get your emotion up to 20, that's going to be pretty good, because 80% of yourself is really there, to be able to get things done. So if you really look, we could see that whole brain functioning is based in a JC quanta in language, and it's like got to add up, and you can't be using language which is like nominalized or unspecified verbs, or having missing referential index, so it's very past where things are, and it's vague, so it cannot actually be defined where something is. And so this smart contract more coming along is helping where all this is, because people just want to have a vending machine, that works. So, of course, you and I, we have an Ethernet connection in the fourth dimension, and that's in plasma, which is the state of a colloid. And a morphogenic field is in this fourth dimension, which is held more, and this is really where the living tissue is of the protoplasm of our species, and the cellular membrane of the brain of our species, and the brain and the life colloid, which is this membrane of life itself. And so you and I, in our awareness, we're really having connected to the vacuum by having be emptied more inside, and you've got the most functional plasticity. And so a JC quanta is conducted to you across space. You've just got a tiny little bits of the information, but it can cause you to suddenly see the whole set. You only have to have little bits of it, and then, you and I, we have a capacity, just like Bluetooth uses the ambient field, so does your brain. This is the reason behind my having made several circuits and things as well, showing how radiant energetic dynamo can work, which are capturing magneticity from the ether, which is beginning to happen more today, where we've got things. Okay, so we could pick up patterns out, and this conductedness is on a JC quanta, so it's like a quadrillion units of a JC quanta in a light second. And for all of us, you only need bits that's needed, and suddenly you can, from the holofractal of the set, you could be emitted the conducted field, and this can really be described in your cellular membrane. So where you, and we're talking about right now, sort of you've got the capacity to be as a transceiver, and a morphogenic field is existing, which is conducted across the vacuum, and a JC quanta is, quadrillions of units in a light second. And so what's emitted to you who's living, you can be aware more of perception, and it's this who is real. So who is real is aware of perception, and it's not a stagnant place anywhere per se, but perception itself, where awareness really is, where you'll have a nativity, for instance. That's what's called birth, but it's a nativity in nature, and the death of the body. I is a witness and aware of this, and is beyond the states, and of course it's a field, like I said, which is held by the living tissue, and as a memory, and as an event, like when you were born. That's all. The word nativity is a word that's natural, that you would say that's what this is. But our awareness really is where you're observing this, and you're beyond deep sleep, and you're beyond dreaming, and also wakefulness, because we just said that wakefulness is a limited phenomena itself as well. So I awareness is like being empty and simply being in having care and not having any dialogue there, so that you're more able to be in perfect detachment. And so who's living and who's real is I aware more of, where all things comes and goes. And so it's really absolute space, which is eternal inside, is the only thing which is absolute. And so between living being, you've got this omnipresence across space itself. This is never on or off. So, it's running off the ambient field, tapped more like you've got 6 volts around you, and there's a perpetual spin of atom. And this all can be, talked more about in Job's Magnicity, but talking about whole brain functioning, you've got quorum sensing that's conducted, and this is life where a whole is more detected over life forms and species. And so everyone who's listening would love more whole brain functioning. Why? Because it allows you to clear away duality. And so, that we're just talking about where somebody is conflicted and valuing where the conflicted part is, which is the way that you would do this at the grassroots level, which is something which we could come to talk about in the series and things. But so mostly you could say most everybody really wants to be able to clear away duality, and so you've got habits, which is something automatic more happening afterward, which just does this for you, and suddenly you're just feeling more bliss. And you're feeling more bliss, why? Well, because you've achieved emptiness. And so where somebody could be changing their ways of feeling and listening to things and looking, you could take stock ever more and examine what's more close by. But what happens where some sensory system deletion would have been, you see? So could you learn a bit more about that by looking into this work? It's by the bondage of whatever that would have been, an inadvertence, of course, that you've got an attention. But here it's becoming ever more liberated, because what's being taken for granted really is for you to have begun to have a question ever more, which is really obvious where things are or could be put to ever be more doubtful for you just for the moment here. And you could ask yourself questions like, well, is I who it is, or who is witnessed, and who witnessed your nativity? And is it this I who witnessed your nativity? And is this good for your being nobody rather than running around trying to be somebody? And who is it that sort of is dressing up ever more where your parents are and sitting where they are, or you? And who is it that you are? Is this sort of being told you, or could you imagine more that there is a massive cost that you could be relaxing of your shoulders and tummy now more and letting go, which has been a great cost to have uphold the past, hasn't it been? See? But just by having instruction to relax shoulders and how's your tummy feel, space comes to be more where you are. And room inside is really ethic, where ethic is the word room. So you're having room, and if you did that well, you shrunk a lot of things that you didn't need to have there for sure. You've disappeared those things so that everything's more quiet and empty and crystal clear. And you're shrinking things that you've been spending a lot of time on to having to demolish that now. So it's really a fact that more that you've demolished it, and it's pretty easy for the false really dissolves everywhere the false is discovered, because it's dissolved. Discovering truth, it's really acted upon, because everything in life really is dry, to come to be more in the sun. And if you've examined, you really have got a good concept, and it really is not food for challenge or any nature, but just emptiness to let information come in and guide things, and trust that you have perfect recall for this up to several weeks afterward. So it's the lies where knowing is, of course, and who it is, which is versus what you don't know and who you are. So these things could be very skin thin, more separating us ever more from reality. And it's really ideas in eye awareness. We've started to talk a bit more about you having an empty center and that being equivalent to space itself, stellar. And so eye awareness and a body was born and a body would die, but this eye awareness is eternal evermore as I am. And this is something which comes to be ever more developed. And so it's real and it's within us and without. So we're talking about this I being you who is more omnipresent. And so in eye awareness, really, you've got space eternal, and it's for you who's real and living and who is aware of perception. Of course, you're using more this fourth dimension like we're starting to talk about here. This is what is conducted. And from T-junction, which we have, we're getting readout on a very fine level. And so omnipresence is who is this? Is creating the world within you? Is this eye awareness? Is this your whole brain functioning mind ever being made? And how is it that what the process is of your making of your mind through generalization and deleting information and constructing that, and how accurate is it as a result of using those processings? So it's unmasking everything. So you've really got a supreme perception as you've got ever more mastery over the use of the vestibular sense now that we're starting to give you a key to look ever more into. So whole body movement is predicating words like up, in, on, down, sideways, stopped, start, time is suspended. These are all predicating the vestibular sense, just like to go, get, have, do, feel is kinesthetics, or the sound of the words we're using to discuss, to mention, to admit, explain. This rings a bell, that clicks are all auditory words. And to get a clear perspective and a frame of reference to be able to perceive and to see what I mean, these are all visuals. So to forward, to back, to up, to down, these are words that's predicating the vestibular sense, which is a whole body movement. And how are you using this to be associated in life? Because, everybody wants someone who is empty, more or less, and you've got such grace because you're so empty, and you've got a power for people to do things for you as well. So it's really how integrated you are and how congruent and associated and what impartedness is of your magnicity where you are, and this being imitated and just taken aboard. So you could say really this sort of is universal love versus frozen logos, which you learn how to see so easy. So it's the closest to this point you could come more in words, yet in jubulation, it's sort of love is inside and out, and it's and it's from the inside out, not the outside in, more or less. But so it makes life real and very beautiful and gorgeously delicious. So something can have a great fragrance, of course. You've got my teacher, I could remember Cloud, teaching me a bit more about what components of everything was that you could have a deeper insight and get a handle on things like the supreme me and who is omnipresent, and complete sort of software where you are or someone else downloading and eventually having some app and being able to use this. So this is describing the vestibular sense that we all have, and our just for an example, or like, you could have facial recognition or something. But you've got the vestibular sense, and this is giving us an inner capacity to navigate. That's right. Navigation, your own navigation, you see. So ever before this, really, most could have not even considered this, but for many, many, many years I've been behind helping educate people a bit more about the vestibular sense. And as you know, our work all gets shadow banned, so like cystic fibrosis tape sticks at like 222 people ever saw it or something, and so most of the work is that way. And this sort of happened since 2016, more or less, but that's another story. So where everybody is, you could claim ever more your power back by gaining ever more of this enrichment. And so you could look to see who's speaking and who's there and who's representing things for us, and who's excellent at statesmanship, where everybody is. So we could have a golden age that we're moving into now, you see. So because there's strange attractor that's drawing us forward toward this. So everybody who's in support positions really around you, really nicely dressed, gorgeous looking, and serving you most. Oh my God, quite amazing, Lukey, and all our family. And these are people who have left their ways behind to follow. And this Father's words guiding the world evermore and coming from you, really coming from you. Yeah, that's right, the source. And so what's beautiful, what's noble, honest, beauty, the universe is of a realizedness where everyone is of truth, which is this which is mutually beneficial. And so a republic of peace is the social compact that you choose. I mean, this sort of is boundless love, you see. So being in your presence even, and sitting and contemplating and having a capacity to be able to hear you, it's emotion and it's good, you see. And so you and I, awareness is a connection, connecting with what this is of a great deep consideredness, and this is a spiritual practice. I'd say this is really the course. So a great cosmic wheel of life is ongoing, where a river is flowing, and some of this water really is here in three stages. Like you've got H3O2, which is structured water that Life Hydrate does. It's vitamin L. And so you've got really some which has already reached this goal, and then you really knowing there's two other types of water as well. But this third type of water is H3O2. It's an actual water. That's a gel that we have in our body that's structured. And yet you know really that there's a present that's here right now, and it's sort of being unwrapped. And so that's exactly it for sure. And so you and I, wherever more further that we go into the past or the future, you're really going to not have the capacity much to be able to see eye awareness, yet it's everywhere nature is and love is, and where no difference is. And so it's like getting rid of the dichotomous part of one's own self. So to say I love you, that can't be improved upon, of course, because if you add more words to that, you're going to diminish it. And so by just I love you is enough of itself. You can't add more or subtract from it. And so you're in a visiting frame as you are, and how good is this? Because you're really in uptime, and you've really got good common sense to have beauty where life is, and love is your admiration, where people come to the door and you open it, you go, hi. You raise your voice a little bit, and you're really more in a visiting state. So remaining in a visiting state, wrapping around the whole thing that we're doing to come to eventually these things being future paced, so that maybe that you could be looking around and seeing what you in front of you and what could be in a future moment too, and it triggering ever more this memory. So as you could follow this advice and trust and have love, and have a worthiness where all is given, and eyes, of course, really you have is experience accumulated, and it's really the very weight evermore of appreciation you and I or anybody does have for life. And who is it that's lifted their hands for you? Where is it, and how much is someone devoted to you by what they're saying, and how much have they given of themselves? So the mind really is the knower of you, and who knows the knower, you see. These are good questions. So the mind doesn't know itself, but it's itself a central organised nervous system, yet a mind is discontinuous over, it's repeated over and over again, blanking out. And yet something like that's what we're talking about is eye awareness is always on. So it's really over the top of sleep. It's over the top of all dreamedness and gesticulated muddy want, where anyone is of some distractedness, where nothing would have been absolute, where that would have been. And can you hear that I just said nothing is? That's right. And it's true. It's empty space, which is absolute. So if it's your thought or anyone else's that you and I we could become something, or we are something continuous to register, this is I awareness within you. And it's what everything else is, of some discontinuousness, and what's really real and versus what's fictional and is illusionary, because it's temporary. And something is more permanent. So what's indescribable and consciousness of some intermittentness of where gap is, yet there is this continuity in I-awareness, which is your true identity, and this is a sense of identity that's beyond whatever anybody could have said, but is boundless evermore, and it's something that's beyond perception itself. And so we're talking a bit about what is your original state of being, and if you could start to edit out all of the things which isn't, that'll be going to be really good. But if it's sort of really for us or for anybody to know how perfectly I-aware evermore you could be, and to come now evermore to have more a need for a perfected mind, whole brain functioning is called zeroing out all your internal dialogue. So suddenly everything's more quiet. The mind, people go to places where this could happen, or they come to others, or they could have the image of someone which causes the mind to fall quiet. And so how does this happen to you? And is this all seen rightly once a mind is quiet? And why and what would it be that you and I, where we are, where things slip, which they do always, where the darkness comes on, of course everything comes to be joined again, and we're reminded of this. And as the dawning is, as the sunlight starts to cause everything to have its individuality evermore again, and makes us up where the world is active. And so it's really an awareness that you and I have to see what's changeless in a background of the changeful. And it's an I-aware effect that changes the mind more, where light is ever more calm and a steadiness of hand is. And this is a confidence, and this is I-awareness. And it's just you being in more uptime, like, hi, how you doing? That's a visiting frame, and you've wrapped that round everything. It's really an inner energy that's a wake-up for who's there, and a great induction, and the miracle that you could see without any effort, and you're not having to see much with effort on anyone's part. So truth really isn't any peer to assist, of course, another per se, but a very imaginative if you thought that way. So it's really to formulate for you within your own self truth, which denies whatever should be, but you could note more clearly it's sort of really can't be contained in your word or what's not fact or imagination, but yet you're really able to help someone where this isn't. It's how someone has helped themselves. And so could somebody have assisted me to help myself? It's going to be expressed only where denial is of a false actions are, and to clear those away. And so what anybody wants in a yes man, if that was, is really not anything that's of substance in independent thought. And yet it really is you who could see through the false as false, and you really, really reject that. And so it's whole brain functioning evermore now here, which is teaching you to think about what your generalizations are, what are the very things which you've been omitting and not having brought up, and what's the structure that you're using, or is it like most people have just got a bit of a word salad going on? Could you have a structure? If you're learning whole brain functioning, you're starting to have more of a structure, and the false is liberating and energizing, that you could feel a laying open ever more of a road that's inside and onward, that's about what's less travelled. And so your heart is where your path is, and your path is where the heart is. And it's really being empty and having achieved emptiness, your bliss just naturally flowing. And it's really a gorgeous sense of all things, an ongoing meditation without any technique having to be needed. And so everyone really is ever learned in an invitation for contemplation. Imitation is a right powerful way. Contemplation is an experience in other ways to learn. And eye awareness, being empty is a seeking of a source of the sensation and consciousness. And so it's really conveyed where speaking is, where yes is, that you could see what's noted, and you're focusing on being able to achieve ever more yes where you are. And you've got corridors that suddenly that were darkened all of a sudden brightened up, and you're telling me really where you are, where what you own and what this means in a matter which your property should be protected. And so a man as and a woman as our species, that's our species, and all this is your title, and all right flows from this title and the use of this in any document. So it's desire for you or I to ever have a feeling of an urge and have an earnestness where things are counted better. But could a paragraph really that's edited share bits and pieces for someone where the family is, and the information evermore is being able to be got around? But if you're sitting right now, or you may be standing, you could be listening to this or reading, it really is what's proceeding evermore that's interesting to you, that's taking you into more your whole brain function capacity, because it's the frontal cortex that's grown out of anatomy implicating interest. And so talking to each other where this work is, you really probably don't care too much for a sermon. Maybe just like what this is, it's sort of a private appointment that you've made where you're coming to listen. And deep it is where answers are, and the mind is more for quiet. It's possible for you to have a really great inducted conditioning and be able to change things around for yourself, which most people could think, oh my God, how am I going to change my own self? This is the most stubborn thing. And so that's what this work is about, really, giving you the keys to note how you could so easily see ever more clearly, and you could feel a passion ever more about an emotion that's involved. So, you're not polarizing everyone, but it doesn't mean that you don't polarize, because there's something intelligent about that. It's just that you're focusing ever more where agreement is, and getting agreement and conditions of agreement is outright, and yet there really is no real understanding there could be, except you're getting agreement, and nothing of a kind really could have challenged you. It is just that no challenge is where it is all right with you. And could you say that? So if otherwise somebody could keep quiet, basic, because nothing may be touching where something is, or, oh my God, something is so touching, but the goal where any direction is really the grist. And so this is the talking that we're doing, and this is how can you improve ever more your own inner silence and have cleared up dichotomy after this, and have like a better feeling about everything, matter of fact. And so it's exact, and it's what you've done, and it's what you're listening and hearing, and it's sudden eye awareness that you have. So how does eye awareness sort of happen? It could happen without any steps or any technique. Eye awareness really is nothing that necessarily gradual about it. Empty centeredness is happening, and suddenly it's ever more, comes to be more plateaued. And so the center happens suddenly, and it's irreversible once you've got this to have occurred, and you're ever more in uptime. And so this JC Quanta, which is 26 dimensions, is really seeing virtual reality, which is previous that whatever has been has just been a mere abstraction in relation to what this is. So a resonance is existing, and yet 4 beat, 4 timing could have squared you out and only given you 8 overtones from your brainstem. And so, You can't be making a rose in your brain so easy, not at all. But you could if you got rid of 4-beat and 4 timing and things like this. So something is really going on ever more where you're drawing a line and where the time is of your own seeing now ever more, which it can be different than the way it was. And you could see this world ever more where illusion has been, and you could leave that and have left it behind. So transformation for you today is ever inevitable. You really can go back and listen to this tape. I think it's incredible for you to have empty space and have eternal and what's absolute. And so this is I am, where you could be in I awareness, and it's letting you or I know, everyone, that what is it to become, but it isn't you really not becoming, because there is no becoming. It's you merely discovering who you really are and moulding yourself ever more to be ever more receptive to patterning and being able to pick up patterns, and whole brain functioning patterns in particular. So we're going to be talking a bit more about this. So because when you're using direction, you're going to be moving toward and forward versus outside and away. So it's really not a seeing where anything would have been otherwise in a right way, but some grievous just waste of time that would have been without having a proper whole brain pattern focus. And so neither the past nor the future, just to be where technique isn't, except just your own being and your empty center. And so what's beneficial to you onward really is an onward, outward-lived, spiritual, enigmatic meditation, omnipresent. And so this is ongoing, standing, living, walking, sitting, it's not turned on or off. And so it's a proper place where a state of being, and it's being, not a state, which is inside love, also understanding. And so it's from the inside out rather than the outside in. And so the outer world really is neither there to help nor hinder, and it really is your system of no technique necessarily to have any action. And it's really not more than anything than you gaining your outcome now, you see, and feeling a lot better after this, like feeling really better more, and perhaps having a plateau more, which you can have. So it's working where you're future pacing the things that you've talked about or said. And so it's a full deck of things more that you're using where you are. And so it could take time for you to learn bits and pieces about this, but the concentration of your own total being and the presence of now and ever concerned where you're more in your a present sense and you're associated versus you're running along and you're sort of very dissociated in life. So whole brain functioning and the training in eye awareness improves your knowing and response, and it gets back ever more effect. So communication, the definition of that is the response that you're getting back. That's the effect of your communication. Okay. So you and I, we could understand how reducing whatever it could be to make sure that you've got a neural efficiency quotient behind what you're doing. Because why? Well, because you've got no bias. You've got nothing to avoid. And so understanding, understanding, or misunderstanding, it really is a standing and some degree of standing, and how whole body calibration really could give you greater capacity to sculpt things so that you've got a preferred mode of sorting information that calibrates ever more. You could be able to calibrate movements and verbal and non-verbal patterning to look to see what's going on more in the deeper structure of the brain. And in particular, you could clarify ever more syntax and things, which you're looking at how the vestibular sense, which is the sense that's over the top of all the other senses, is being used to be more associated toward things or dissociate, for instance. You're understanding how the vestibular sense is used. So communication comes to be ever more a language of peace, and a magnaphoric totalities existed. Like this is what a grand unified totality is about, called gut. And so this new information that really is conveying effective across diverse groups of beloved really is an array of a profession and cross-disciplinary background, in particular valuable really organisations of management where you've got right around the world as geographical dispersed groups, or understanding and having been trained more. Certain it is, like at least some 10,000 people know more about what the Eclipse movement, for instance, which is currency that's usury less. Okay. So where we are, we're dispersed, yet we've got something that's decentralised where we are, and it's working on the same goal where things are, where multi-language environments are. It's sort of language which could have been a barrier, and also cultural, idiosyncratic differences and personal differences. Yet communication style where someone is could be successful or could be hindering. And it behooves you or I to really be able to grasp whole brain functioning, because it's the finest, deepest insight into the use of our sensory motor complex to achieve whole brain functioning. And so the training involves several major distinctions. Of course, the vestibular sense we started to be talking about is a meta sense and sensory motor syntax it's over the top of. And so in the training, you learn how to sculpt, and you're using non-verbal and verbal combined behaviour in terms of bypassing conscious objection. And so you're identifying and addressing sort of where resistance would have been, and you're using models in whole brain functioning as modal operators of possibility, for instance, which there it is, it's valuing the conflict part that you have. How good is that? Wow, because it's got rapport with you see, to assist where transformation is. And wherever anything else is sort of really doesn't have this. So in whole body calibration, it's being able to observe all the movements that you could see going on, and to be able to calibrate what is the internal matrix of the nerve that's behind all of this. So the body movements are acting as a window into the internal matrix of your mind, and job instrument that assists to help you where this is assess more whole brain functioning. And took me some 19 years of research to do at New York University. So to analyse verbal and non-verbal language and to pinpoint across areas where blockages could have been and stuck states can have existed, where overlay states ever more are. So those are things which is not easy, but yet really hot for us to clear up. So it's isolating the particles where deeper insight is, and so now you're able to look to see what has been underlying, where precognitive, where the patterns would have been shaping the way that you thought. And that's what's going on, you see, where somebody realises that pasteurised didn't exist much, and there was no such thing as urine never being not turbid. There was no such thing as nothing like that ever not becoming turbid. And so something got the wool like pulled over people's eyes, but you could look, and now it's suddenly you're processing information differently, that information is coming into you. And so if you know, as you know, that pleasure and interest cause you to be in the frontal cortex, otherwise you're not in the frontal cortex. It's sort of like more amygdala functioning instead, and so it's not whole brain functioning. So anatomy that implicates interest has caused our frontal cortex to be grown more. And so it's really based on a training like this, which you're becoming ever more aware of, reframing the perspective that you've had toward ever more a proper quarry with life, where index really afterward is lasting, and you've got transformation gently guiding you more, where individual, family is all connected, and you're getting a great benefit. You're embracing ever more like what this rainbow prophecy is about, which this father, instead of perceiving resistance, is really a problem, and in as much as everything has got a preferred mode of sorting information someone has, and you could give insight into this and give one which is more whole brain patterned instead, as to be the groupthink. So you're giving notes and you're giving a view. It's like a life feedback, and you're providing valuable insight. And for everyone, you're using the vestibular sense, which is your back, forward, up, down, stop, start, and that you've emptied everything out because you've polarized with your own first attention. You have access to this ring of circle of power evermore. So you have valuable insight where you could use the vestibular sense. You could start to learn more about having the distinction predicates in your own language and how's that using to navigate and cause transformation to be. You could see that like whole brain functioning offering you more deeper insight into our sensory motor complex, because we have amongst the most scientific taxonomy of this that anybody else does have in the world. And so analog sculpting and perceptual fires evermore could you imagine of time, like what is emotional, the patterning that you have, and the mind readiness of technique which you could learn, perceptual pattern recognition. And so positions existing, of course, letting you have a more gained secureness over your own behaviour and transformation, and having a viewpoint more that's fostering a more well-formed outcome gained and being inclusive. So you could see a future arrived where source code like this, where whole brain functioning is made more into machine language, automating task and streamlining the vending process we start to talk about. But that's what's going on where your brain is. So to process by smart contracts and in a JC Quanta, you've really got power tools which like automate the time and save like a triage of time that could be spent, like 9 hours where I looked at the hotline call centres and things, and to apply whole brain functioning more to assist to cause the triage time be cut down from 9 hours to maybe just 8 minutes of scroll. So you use whole brain functioning technology to screen calls and where help is call centres to be, and so you've resumed a lot of what handling is, where processing routine is, and an arena really exists where you also could think about, you've got political candidates, you could use whole brain functioning to be able to look at what the capacity is, where someone is, and to give them a score more, and chat box summarising whole brain functioning and how that's working more where print or education is things. So you could document more and copy, and start now by prioritising this about whole brain functioning ever more in your life. There's so many other considerations where this work is, but today and where you are right now, I would say nobody's ever heard about the vestibular sense and how this is our primary sense of integration and the use of this. So for documents, for copy, for prioritising where your message is, it's a deep freeing you up, that you've got ability to have a deeper focus, that you could really be assisting people where service and product is. So services and product where more strategic aspects are of transformation, and your ability to use this where management is, you're really applying whole brain functioning principles to gain rapport, to get more into the frontal cortex and have more frontal cortex engagement. And you're looking at essentially whole brain functioning patterning. So would there be a reason why you wouldn't want whole brain functioning, that you wouldn't want somebody in their frontal cortex? No, because it's your capacity to navigate change effectively, isn't it? And interest and pleasure gets you into the frontal cortex, and that's my work. I spent 19 years behind what I'm talking about today. Before I started really talking more about it, I'd spent 19 years looking at it. So if you are dealing otherwise where resistance is, and you've got selective restrictive violations going on, you could learn how to use those to enhance communication and streamline the process. You could be driving ever more data that's driven to leadership with the ideas that you have that's more positive and successful. So you could change things so that you've got this beautiful, pleasurable experience inside. Would be doing this, and you've got more sales of product and service because you're selling the prospect of a pleasurable experience, not the product or the service, but the prospect of a pleasurable experience that someone's having. And so whole brain functioning is a good lettering, a good learning, a good massive benefit to any organisation. You're eliciting what the same is where others are and promoting this around the world more, where you're keeping an emotional level of 2 where the intelligence is. So you're calibrating verbal and non-verbal patterns and a gainedness of the behavioural manifestation of some internal response is, so that you're able to be more receptive and pick up things more from as a response to what you've said. So that's the effect of what you've communicated. So preferred modes of sorting information, moving forward and having things within, which is a direction more for whole brain patterning versus outside and away. But the approach really to challenge where things are is the whole brain functioning meetings and intercommunication, where management could be ever more streamlined. You've got a neural efficiency being recognised, and it's really noted that how your state of employee and customers all apply synesthesia but don't even know that's going on. Why should you not learn about whole brain functioning and learn about the value of synesthesia itself, the concept of this is and how this is working? So it's written, and this is being given to you, so you're getting a therapeutic mind ever more set underneath. And you've got whole brain functioning ever more activity, just an inquiry, and all of a sudden it's starting to consider you're considering things very differently, and it's organisational. It always is allowing you to be able to be more effective in creating change and initiating partnering and in your own team building. So a really good example of whole brain functioning learned is such where anybody could have had negation and having an embedded command where things are, where you're using negative embedded commands like try not to, have a lot of benefit with this, applying this work over the next few days. So there's no such thing as negation at the primary level of experience. So the benefit, you've responded by saying something like, do you really want spine care? Do you care for some spine care? That might be a great message to someone rather than you're driving past seeing a sign that goes, do you have back pain? And it's like embedding that to people who are driving past. It's kind of not going to be very helpful as what it would be to have something that looks really good and it's asking the customer, is that something which you care for? Do you need spine care? Okay. So it's better parenting to say, hey, stay on this side of the road, it's safe, rather than saying, don't, run over the road or cross over because you're going to be hit by a car. So you can hear the embedded commands where people are, and now it should be that you could be starting to use your embedded commands more. So being prudent, you're caring to have ever good more client listener models of whole brain patterning and associated behaviour going on where your shopping is and where you're conducting business over the net. You've really got a lot of speaking that has to be done. You've also got non-verbals and verbals where this is, you've got a parallel sort of a sorting style, and the integration between the parts you're looking at is sort of a direction forward, not backward, and also within and also toward, rather than what would have been outside or away from and not part of you. But preferred programming ever more direction where whole brain patterning is. And so direction is ever more used toward and within, and aversion is always away and outside. And this is a pronoun for what we're talking about, and that is a pronoun for things that's outside and away. So whole brain functioning is you having a far greater awareness of the message that you have and story use, the metaphor you're speaking. And to the other than conscious mind, Lukey, you're having rapport evermore where you've got your implicit connection and you're using another set of information and you've began to do this and things can have never been the same again. And it's this set which is piggybacking other things to help get processed along as called like a synesthesia. So the use of the word synesthesia is a transformation where you're taught in whole brain functioning training that it's like something which is you could use because it bypasses conscious objection. And you're able to relate more where whole brain functioning synesthesias are, where stimulation is in one sense, using the vestibular sense, applying fuzzy function in another set, but it's always automatically triggering that away and naturally resolving any stuck state. So you're really applying a large enough resource state. That's the message today, to collapse any stuck state into this, and this is your dissipating the aversive response. And so it's you're able to get agreement. And is that a good statement? Yes. And so it's the longer that you have paced, you've got rapport, it's money in the bank. So it's inducted. So you're looking at how transformation really has happened and how did it? You went into the future, you look back, you saw how it occurred. Pleasure neurologically inhibits aversive centers and vice versa, and you're referring to an interconnectedness between people, and it's a sensory motor complex where things are. And once somebody is understanding more of the vestibular sense, it's like, isn't this what you really want? Of course it is. It's giving you a way to look to see, for where anyone is, the degree to which somebody is more in whole brain function and whole brain patternness. So pleasure on the one hand, like we've said, interest triggers whole brain functioning so that you're really ever more in the frontal cortex, you've got whole brain patterning, whereas on the other hand, aversion would have triggered a limited mind functioning in the past. And so your frontal cortex now, sort of, which it is, all things are growing out of anatomy, implicating interest and pleasure. So what's aversive, like you don't want, can't, should, try, but, must, only, never, always, you might get rid of for a year or so at least until you learn how to be positive, and then you can throw all those words back in, because what you're doing with those words is positive. So what's aversive that's been that you've had associatedness to what was a limited mind of transformed synaptic gaps, that comes to be more reconfigured. And it no longer can have been just shutting down your frontal cortex like it was, like 4-beat or 4-timing does. And so like brain freeze. So can't somebody where you are try, but always, never, it's a model of modal operators of possibility rather than necessity. And so I wonder, is it possible, but you're given choice, and so you're using a type of a voice which is rolling and slightly slurred, giving people a feeling more of being relaxed inside, rather than it's going to be clipped right now and I am going to make sure that you've got limited mind function. Okay. It's a really unique technique. You can understand ever more how analog is shaping you to be more eye-aware yourself, how music does that as well, and how your relation with others and yourself, and it's how you're keeping your own self company. So you're caring ever more in terms where you've got levels that make you ever more be able to have change work more automatic. You've got change, which is the quality of life that you get afterward by having applied whole brain functioning preferred modes of sorting information. You really develop sticky factor, and you're getting a better quality of life index afterward. And plenty of studies that we've done shows that. So you become more mature. So it's times where someone could have had a lost sort of stubbornness, but a pattern not really having served you, and you really learn how to reframe things there and to create meaningfulness where this is, and to have dissociated from what didn't work there and associate ever more to another subject that you wire in more, which is a new movement experience. So you're using kinesthetic, auditory, visual syntax, which is the preferred mode, sort of assorting information, and you're valuing the conflicted part, like what we've said if we backtrack what we've just gone over. You're really creating a resource state which is large enough to collapse the stuck state into it, and you're applying things which is more like a synesthesia we're starting to be talking about, that's changing the way that you've ever thought and forever. And so it's really a longer connection for you to have your brain where no longer it's got this unnecessary, superfluous activity. And so you're relaxing, you've got really a greater learning technique, and programming, where things are going on several levels of consciousness. So whole brain functioning really is an advanced taxonomy of the use of our sensory motor complex. And you've got like an ethmoid organ. Do you know about this? You've got a vomeronasal organ. Do you know about this? Okay, so many things that you could learn more about the senses. And so whole body and body part calibration, certain it is that you are knowing what proprioception is, that's body part movement, and whole body movement is vestibular predicating. And so you're learning how to calibrate and track all the non-lexical and lexical analysis also. You've got syntactical, semantic, and discourse analysis. And it's sort of pragmatic analysis that somebody learns to do, and suddenly you're able to start to give more a whole brain functioning profile. You're able to look at logos and see where unity consciousness is perfect, or you could see the logos that's being used is frozen logos instead. So because logos really kind of not before this point defined ever more into numbers of words, and today now you've got ascentic and proxemics, which you could use, and you can get a magnaphoric nature of the logos in a whole brain functioning terms. So it relies upon your ascentics and proxemics, which you could learn more about. We only got so much time just to mention some few things, but whole brain functioning is ever more imprinted, where adventure-based learning is you use experiential-based learning and modelling and using initiatives that you've got like group and partnering and self-initiative types of events, which could draw you out ever more. And so you've got in playfulness some culmination of an intrinsic patterns that you bring to task, and so it's possible to be able to look at that and see how all of this is working for you and adjust and add things and put things in. So your power is your capacity to have social influence, your inductive reasoning, and your whole brain patterning evermore is looking at you're being more associated more in life, you're more congruent, and you have a mood which is actually more the degree which is of the emotion displayed more in unity consciousness versus frozen logos. So your focus is really analysing large experiential learned patterns where you are, and recognition of whole brain functioning instead, where you're using the vestibular sense to identify, what's toward, what's within, and how somebody using their direction this way. You're identifying the patterns exact, which is about brain interest and positive in relation to how inclusive or integrated. And so, you've got a structure going on which is valid. Things which I'm talking about here now is face valid. You've got contextual conditions that we're talking about where this is getting put into some context. And you've got experts that agree. So you've got micro movements, which is things which happen within just like a few seconds or half a second less. And you've got macro more movements, and you're able to look at these and see the accessing cues and to gather information. That's what's behind for forensics to how somebody's using their sensory motor complex. So as you could see clustered information, and you could learn where deductive, you're using reasoning, is to start predefining rules which really can cause you to see that something is coming from memory versus it's being constructed, for instance. And so all is really being applied. You're learning to be able to read the body more like a book, and you're learning that you've got these filters of timeline therapeutics, which are major ways that you're processing information preferred, called metaprograms, which are analysing and looking at specific conditions or cases. You're able to apply whole body calibration so that you're ever more being taught. And so it's a settings of experiential adventure-based learning that I did for many years with my teacher, Cloud, and learning how to do behavioural intervention as synesthesias. You could see applying whole brain functioning, tracking, and skills like techniques which will be taught to you that engage your capacity, of course, like to see movement and be able to determine more deeper internal matrix, and tracking verbal simultaneously with non-verbals, and micro and macro movement, and seeing the family of emotions as being expressed behind something, from facial expressions and things. So you're using all of this as windows into the internal matrix of the mind. So in whole brain functioning, that's what this work is about. And so you're calibrating those patterns to the deepest metaphor, more of unconscious experience. And you're taught more to have whole brain functioning patterning and able then to recognize more. Because why? Well, because you're in your frontal cortex. And you've got your left and right hemisphere and the front and the back of your brain operating. So it's easy to sense what sentiment is, of course, toward what's attractive versus what's aversive. And whole brain functioning analysis, sort of verbals and non-verbal classification of such. So it's you're using source code to apply to machine translation. And so it heavily relies upon more inductive learnedness, just like you do. From once you learn this, you start to apply and you learn ever more. And you go from learning level 1 to learning level 4. And 0 level learning is where you're comfortable and you haven't learned anything. So it's a verbal classification, which is code, and you're applying this to create translation. And so that's picking an array of patterns out that's expressed. And so phrases which like facial or hand movement, whole brain functioning patterning really is, and so that could be modeled more. So operators that's more using modal operators a possibility, for instance, like I wonder if, maybe that's so, versus you're not going to, you are, and you're using necessity. How much do you know about this, and how much better could things be that you are starting to learn more about how to use your language, your verbal and non-verbals? But really, whole brain functioning is versus like having had a limited mind and unseen behaviour that's detected responses for honesty versus just fabricating things. So as you could really see how whole brain functioning inductive thinking could allow you to ever draw more conclusion and to have based track behavioural responses more in relation to things that's observational. And to have comparator, you must have an observational reference point to make a comparator. So it's really, how could you imagine, a hotline which has all this technology put, it's the centre for Traffic Beloved, for instance, and helping the nation and helping the world. But whole brain functioning patterning recognition is really learning to take practiceness over time, the capacity to determine whole brain functioning. So you've got pleasurable versus aversive verbals and non-verbal patterning. How associated are you, being present tense orientated versus dissociated? But we would have time to talk in a future moment about a whole range of things that's to do with what do you do to be able to be more excellent. There's so many things you could be doing, which is whole brain functioning training. It's like knowing not to be a control freak and being able to pick out all the patterns of control freak behaviour. So it's really being more towards subject, object, verb, and it's also gathering by your inductive reasoning to allow sort of a greater conclusion. So it all really is based more in contextual, more constructive, observed, tracked pattern. And so based upon more a likelihood after that of pattern, you see. So it's a level of syntax of behaviour in terms of pleasure versus aversion. And so it's a verified contextual sort of constructive expert evidence that you're putting forward where you use Jubb's instrument. So it's really especially helpful where someone's dealing and you want to know if something is honest or somebody is more in deceit. But whole brain functioning applies these inductive techniques. It applies whole body calibration we talked about. It applies analog sculpting, which is sculpting the body to change the mind. It uses the change where you can see sentiment changed and note this and to imprint new behaviour, of course, to facilitate positive change. So that your key technique more in whole brain functioning is including facilitated analog sculpting and automatic induction more so like you could have click and zip and sounds which create verification and understanding of more how that works where behavioural changes. But languaging and suggestions where you're using framework for behavioural changes, sort of really anchoring and learning more about rapport building, also reframing. In whole brain flexing, you learn a lot about timeline therapeutics and perceptual filters. And you're learning how to have far more emotional control over, getting a handle on all, and keeping your emotion at a level of 20. So you're using a handle that's got a visualization and using the vestibular sense to associate or dissociate, in verbal and non-verbal patterning. And so it's incredible because most, you could say, is it really good that you're able to show up more and you're being rewarded for more how you're showing up? Yes, you and everyone else as well. So anyway, I hope our show today, mate, has given some deep insight into this, and I'll bet you there's quite a few chapters more that relate to whole brain functioning that we could get into. Anyway, I hope you're having a wonderful day as you've been listening and reading with this, and we're going to be catching up to each other in a future subject. Love you, mate.